Part 2. What? He shook his head. He almost laughed. You're joking, right? But Miska didn't look like she was joking. She was gazing at the vid screens, her eyes shining. Her mouth went dry as he looked up too, and saw those amazing people, so vast and powerful. The light was streaming out of their hands, their heads, their hearts, just as it had streamed out of him. The 12 Astraeus, she whispered, the stars who came down from the sky. She shivered and hugged herself. We thought you were channeling the power of the stars, but what if you are not a channel? What if you are the thing itself? What if there is a star inside you rising up as you come into your power? Lucky's scalp was prickling, his mind reeling. He felt dizzy. It was like standing on the edge of the wheel again, or falling and falling and falling through the night. There can't be a star inside me, he managed to say. Those legends of yours, they're just legends. Mystica wiped her eyes. Of course, she said, but how else can you explain all your powers? The heat, the light, the flames, your brilliance with the astrolabe. She peered deep into his eyes. And you say you hear the stars singing to you. That doesn't mean anything. Star Talkers hear them too. Star Talkers hear only one star, the star they're connected to. How many do you hear? I'm not sure. Lots of them. Lots, she said softly. She shook her head in wonder. That is something no Star Talker could claim. But look! Lucky pointed up at the figures on the screens with their wings and halos, their flaming swords and thunderbolts. The people who held the whole world in their hands. They're incredible. They're like gods. They can do anything. I'm nothing like that. I'm useless, clumsy. Of course, breathed Mystica, clapping her hands together. Of course you're clumsy. You are bound to have trouble with anything physical because this human body is not your true form. Your deep being is that of a star. Oh, come on. Lucky kicked the floor with a cloven hoof. Okay, I've got some power, but what can I do with it? Kill people? Burn things? Hurt myself? But Mystica's eyes were glowing brighter as her convictions grew. You don't know your power's limits, she countered. You've never really let it go, have you? The professor thought there might be a limit to it. If you did, no limit at all. She shook her head again. How extraordinary! To think this might happen in my lifetime. Mystica, cried Lucky, totally embarrassed now. Please, if I'm an Astraeus, then where's my wings and halo? He turned to Bixa, knowing she would say something rude and put an end to this crazy talk. But Bixa's silver eyes looked thoughtful. It's not impossible, she said. The legends are old, aren't they? They're bound to have been corrupted over time. Maybe people wanted to remember the Astraeus as perfect gods, but that might not be the truth. All we really know, is they were beings who had the power of stars inside them. And your power, whatever it is, obviously has something to do with the stars, doesn't it? Lucky gaped at her. How could even Bixa be talking like this? If you really think I've got that kind of power, he challenged, then what am I supposed to do with it? That depends on which of the 12 you are, said Mystica. Each Astraeus was different. Each was the origin of a different kind of myth. All the war gods, sky gods, sea gods, love gods, all the ancient pantheons, they all go back to one of the 12 Astraeus. So if we knew which one you were, then we might guess your power's purpose. If you are the Astraeus of war, say then you must surely be here to fight in the war. If you are the Astraeus of love, Bixa giggled at that, and Lucky blushed deeply. He stared up at the vid screens, trying to remember ancient gods and mythologies, but Mystica's words had prompted another thought. 12, he said. There's meant to be 12. If I'm an Astraeus, where are the others? I pray they were where Professor Bazantine believed we'd find them, behind the blockade in Aquarius, replied Mystica. But even if I'm wrong, and you are not one of them, then isn't it clear that the stars must have given you this power for a purpose? There is something you are meant to do with it. She gazed at him, and in her eyes Lucky saw the hope still radiant in spite of all his denials. He felt deeply uncomfortable, having that gaze upon him. He hated being the centre of such attention, the focus of such faith. He stood up and drew away from the warmth of the bed. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, he muttered, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. I'm never going to use that horrible power again. He expected Mystica to argue with him, as the professor had, and he was ready to argue back, to argue till the end, but to his surprise, her golden eyes filled with sympathy as she watched him. You poor boy, she said, I'm sorry. It is not for us to say who you are, or what you are here to do. You are the only one who can say. But please know this, Lucky. I trust you as I trust the stars themselves. Whatever you decide, we will support you." She was doing her best to reassure him, but his thoughts were again growing darker and darker. Never ever again, he vowed. He shut his eyes and all he could see was darkness. "It's going to kill me. It's not—" "Are you all right, dear?" said Mystica. "I didn't mean to distress you." He shook his head. He tried to push the feelings down, but they were overwhelming. It felt like his face was tightening, and then all of a sudden he was gasping for air and weeping into the night. Without a word, Mystica poured into water and pressed his face into her arms. He felt safe there. It was warm and dark. It smelled like chocolate and spices. He let go, and the feelings came out in a great flood. All the pain and fear and sadness he'd been holding on to for so long. Mystica held him all the time, asking nothing, saying nothing, just letting him cry. Eventually the weeping subsided. He felt strangely light-headed and relieved, as if he'd been washed clean inside. He felt embarrassed too. What was Bixa going to say? But he looked up to see her watching him with something he'd never seen on her face before, something like tenderness. "Are you okay?" she said awkwardly. "Is there anything I can do?" He couldn't help giving her a wry smile. Those were the same words he'd offered her on Scorpio when they were talking about death. How hollow those words seemed now. "You were right," he admitted. "There's nothing anyone can do, is there?" "Not really," Bixa shrugged. "But maybe it helps a bit, knowing you are not alone." Lucky wiped his eyes. "Yeah." He sat up straighter. "Can we talk about something else, something good, for a change? Tell me about this place we're going, Aquarius." "Oh, it's the most beautiful system," Mystica declared. "We crossed the whole galaxy, witnessed so many wonders, but none compares to home. Let me show you the great nebula you'll see as we approach Aquarius. We have an old vidpic of it." She tapped on the wall, and the screens all rippled and resolved to show one giant image, the swirling arms of a spiral nebula. Lucky gaped at it, goose flesh pricking his skin. It was like seeing one of his oldest memories brought to life, the vidpic he'd grown up looking at. "I know that place," he gasped. "There's a vidpic of me as a baby with my mother and father. We were under that nebula. We were there." "Is that so?" said Mystica. She stroked her chin. "Well, it seems fitting, for a nebula is a place where new stars are born. It's a kind of astral nursery. And this particular nebula has some of the most beautiful stars in the galaxy. Remember, Bixa?" "How could I forget?" Bixa's needles glowed silver. "It's my first memory of anything ever. Stargazing in the nebula with our aunts and uncles. The skies were so clear. I'll never forget seeing those baby stars being born." She grinned. "You're going to love it, Lucky. It's really something special." Lucky felt cheered at the prospect. After the horrors of Scorpio, after Gala's prophecies, after all the doubts and fears that were tearing him apart, here at last was something good and bright and pure. Something that spoke to him of better times, when his parents were still together, when he was safe and protected beneath his father's smile. It gave him hope that he was getting closer, that they would soon be reunited at last. Because whatever the Star Talkers and his father said, his father was the only one who really knew the truth about his power, and he was going to prove that Lucky wasn't an Astraeus, or a wolf, or anything strange and supernatural, just a boy who wasn't going to die. Roman 2. The wolf is close. The Astraeus of birth cannot survive it, for it is the end of all life. Thank you.